Good morning. Happy Thursday. Welcome to Quarantine Story Time. I'm Charlotte. I'm running a little late this morning and I'm having some technical difficulties. So we're getting started later than I need to. So these next couple sections are a little bit longer. So we're actually only going to read one section, section 8, but that's okay because I think there's some interesting things happening. So if this is your first time though, welcome. Normally we do a 30 minute to an hour reading. It depends on the sections and it depends on the day. Somewhere I like to be around 45 minutes. I have a playlist of all the readings up until now, so you can catch up on all the exciting War and Peace drama. I will tell you what happened recently is that Napoleon, it's the year 1812, and Napoleon is invading Russia. And they've just set fire to the town of Smolensk to keep him from taking it, but the Russian army has abandoned it. And in doing so, Prince Andrei warned his family to get out of their family estate in Bald Hills because it's just a few miles down the road, or several, but it's on the way to Moscow. On the way to the mosque, it's off of the road that leads to Moscow from Smolensk, I guess is the best way to describe it. So basically, Napoleon's going to be at his childhood home any minute. And his father is getting older, and while he is still a very vigorous, easily agitated, gruff, imperious, demanding person, his mind is getting much more feeble. And so he's not really taking in the fact that they're in danger, and he keeps asserting that it's fine. So that could be a bit of a problem. But when Prince Andrei drove by his family's estate, he poked his head in, and they weren't there. He saw one of the old housekeepers and stewards or something. And the steward said that they were gone. And Prince Andrei thought he meant they were gone to Moscow, which he had suggested would be the safest. So there's that. But we'll see if they're actually in Moscow. But yeah, thank you for joining. Hope you enjoy it today and hope everybody has a great day. Let's just jump right in. So we're in volume 3, part 2, section 8. We're a little over halfway done with this epic novel. So let's go ahead and jump in section 8. Princess Maria was not in Moscow and out of danger, as Prince Andrei thought. After Alpatich's return from Smolensk, the old prince seemed suddenly to have awakened from sleep. He ordered the militia assembled in the village, armed them, and wrote a letter to the commander-in-chief, in which he informed him of the intention he had taken to remain in Bald Hills to the last and to defend it, leaving it up to the commander whether he would or would not take measures to defend Bald Hills, where one of the oldest Russian generals might be killed or taken prisoner, and he announced to the household that he was staying in Bald Hills. But while staying in Bald Hills himself, the prince gave orders for the princess and Desales to be sent with the little prince to Boguchavaro, and from there to Moscow. Princess Maria, frightened at her father's feverish, sleepless activity, which replaced his former inertia, could not risk leaving him alone, and for the first time in her life allowed herself to disobey him. She refused to leave, and the terrible thunder of the prince's wraths fell on her. He reminded her of everything in which he had been unfair to her, trying to accuse her. He told her that she had worn him out, and that she had caused him to quarrel with his son, and that she had nasty suspicions of him, and that she had made it the goal of her life to poison his life, and he drove her out of his study, telling her that it was all the same to him whether she left or not. He said that he did not want to know of her existence, but gave her fair warning beforehand that she dare not show her face to him. The fact that, contrary to her apprehensions, he did not have her taken away by force, but only ordered her not to show her face to him, gladdened Princess Maria. She knew it proved that, in his heart of hearts, he was glad that she was staying home and not leaving. The day after Nikolushka's departure, the old prince put on his full uniform in the morning and prepared to go to the commander-in-chief. The carriage was already at the ports. Princess Maria saw him leave the house and in his uniform and all his decorations, and go to the garden to hold a review of the armed peasants and domestics. Princess Maria was sitting by the window, listening to his voice coming from the garden. Suddenly, several people with frightened faces came running up the avenue. Princess Maria ran out to the porch, down the garden path and into the avenue. A large crowd of militiamen and domestics were moving towards her, and in the middle of this crowd, several men were dragging under the arms a little old man in a uniform and decorations. Princess Marya ran to him, and in the play of light falling in small circles from the shade of the Linden Avenue, she could not account to herself for the change that had come over his face. The one thing she saw was that the former stern and resolute expression of his face had been replaced by an expression of timidity and submission. Seeing his daughter, he moved his strengthless lips and made a wheezing sound. It was impossible to tell what he wanted. They picked him up, carried him to his study, and laid him on that very couch which he had feared so much lately. The doctor brought that same evening, let his blood, and announced that the prince had had a stroke on the right side. To remain in Bald Hills was becoming more and more dangerous, and the day after the stroke, the prince was taken to Boguchavaro. The doctor went with them. When they arrived at Boguchavaro, Desales and the little prince had already left for Moscow. In the same condition, neither better nor worse, stricken with paralysis, the old prince lay for 3 weeks in Boguchavaro, in the new house built by Prince Andrei. The old prince was unconscious. He lay like a disfigured corpse. He ceaselessly muttered something, his eyes and lips twitching, and it was impossible to know whether or not he understood what was going on around him. One thing was known for certain, that he was suffering and still felt the need to express something. But what it was, no one could understand. Was it some whim of a sick and half-demented man? Did it have to do with the general course of things, or did it have to do with family circumstances? The doctor said that the anxiousness he showed meant nothing, that it had physical causes, but Princess Marya thought, and the fact that her presence always increased his anxiousness confirmed her supposition, that he wanted to tell her something. He was obviously suffering both physically and morally. There was no hope of recovery. To transport him was impossible. What would happen if he died on the road? Wouldn't the final end, be better? Princess Marya sometimes thought. She watched over him day and night, almost without sleeping. And dreadful to say, she often watched over him, not hoping to find signs of improvement, but wishing to find signs of the approaching end. Strange as it was for the princess to be aware of this feeling within her, it was there. And still more terrible for Princess Marya was the fact that, since the time of her father's illness, if not earlier, when expecting something, she had stayed with him. And still more terrible for Princess Marya was the fact that, since the time of her father's illness, if not earlier, when expecting something, she had stayed with him. All her personal desires and hopes, forgotten and dormant in her, had reawakened. Things that had not entered her head for years, thoughts of a free life without the eternal fear of her father, even thoughts of the possibility of love and family happiness, ceaselessly flitted through her imagination like temptations of the devil. Try as she might to push them away from her, questions constantly entered her head of how she would arrange her life now, after that. These were temptations of the devil, and Princess Marya knew it. She knew that the only weapon against them was prayer, and she attempted to pray. She stood in a prayerful position, looked at the icons, recited the words of a prayer, but was unable to pray. She felt that now another world had taken hold of her, of the difficult and free activity of everyday life, completely the opposite of the moral world in which she had previously been confined, and in which the best consolations had been prayer. She could not pray and could not weep, and everyday cares took hold of her. It was becoming dangerous to remain in Boguchavaro. There was talk on all sides about the approaching French, and in one village 10 miles from Boguchavaro, an estate had been looted by French marauders. The doctor insisted that the prince be taken further away. The marshal of the nobility sent an official to Princess Marya to persuade her to leave as soon as possible. A police chief came to Boguchavaro and insisted on the same thing, saying that the French were 25 miles away, that French leaflets were going about the villages, that if the princess and her father did not leave before the 15th, he could not answer for anything. The princess decided to leave on the 15th. The cares of the preparations of giving orders, for which everyone turned to her, occupied the whole day before. The night of the 14th she spent, as usual, without undressing, in the room next to the one in which the prince lay. Several times on waking up, she heard his groaning, muttering, the creaking of the bed, and the footsteps of Tikhon and the doctor as they turned him over. Several times she listened at the door, and it seemed to her that he muttered more loudly than usual that night and tossed more frequently. She could not sleep and went to the door several times listening, wishing to go in and not daring to. Though he could not speak, Princess Marya saw and knew how unpleasant he found any sign of fear for him. She noticed with what displeasure he turned away from the intent gaze she sometimes involuntarily directed at him. She knew that her coming at night at an unusual time would irritate him. But never had she felt so sorry for him, so frightened of losing him. She recalled all her life with him and found in his every word and his every act an expression of his love for her. From time to time, amidst the memories, the devil's temptation would break in upon her imagination, the thoughts of what would happen after his death and how her new, free life would be arranged. But she drove those thoughts away with loathing. By morning, he quieted down and she fell asleep. She woke up late. That sincerity which comes with waking showed her clearly that it was her father's illness that concerned her most. She woke up, listened to what was happening behind the door, and heard his groaning, said to herself with a sigh that everything was still the same. But what else could there be? What did I want? I want his death, she cried out with loathing for herself. She dressed, washed, said her prayers, and went out to the porch. At the porch stood carriages with horses, and things were being packed into them. The morning was warm and gray. Princess Marya stopped on the porch, never ceasing to be horrified at her inner loathsomeness and trying to put her thoughts in order before going in to see him. The doctor came downstairs and went to her. He's a little better today, he said. I've been looking for you. Some of what he says can be understood. His head is clearer. Come along, he's calling for you. Princess Marya's heart beat so fast at this news that she turned pale and leaned against the doorway so as not to fall. To see him, to talk to him, to have him look at her now, when her whole soul was so filled with those dreadful criminal temptations, was painfully joyful and terrible. Come along, said the doctor. Princess Marya entered her father's room and went up to his bed. He lay propped up on his back, his small bony hands covered with purple knotty veins, lying on the covers. His left eye looked straight ahead, his right squinting to the side, his eyebrows and lips motionless. He was all so thin, small, and pitiful. His face now seemed to have shriveled or melted away. The features had grown smaller. Princess Marya went up and kissed his hand. His left hand pressed hers so hard that it was clear he had long been waiting for her. He pulled at her hand, and his eyebrows and lips twitched angrily. She looked at him in fear, trying to guess what he wanted from her. When she changed her position so that his left eye could see her face, he calmed down and did not take his gaze from her for several minutes. Then his lips and tongue moved. Sounds came out, and he began to speak, looking at her timidly and imploringly, clearly afraid that she would not understand him. Princess Marya, straining all her powers of attention, looked at him. The comic effort with which he moved his tongue made Princess Marya lower her eyes and force herself to suppress the sobs that rose in her throat. He said something, repeated his words several times. Princess Marya could not understand them, but she tried to guess what he was saying and repeated questioningly the words he had said to her. He repeated several times. She could not understand these words. The doctor thought he could and repeated his words asked. Marya, afraid? The prince shook his head negatively and again repeated the same thing. My soul aches, Princess Marya guessed and said. He grunted affirmatively and took her hand and began pressing it to various places on his chest as if trying to find the right place. All thoughts of you, thoughts, he then pronounced much more clearly and understandably than before, now that he was sure they understood him. Princess Marya pressed her head to his hand, trying to hide her sobs and tears. He moved his hand over her head. I was calling you all night, he brought out. If only I'd known, she said through her tears. I was afraid to come in. He pressed her hand. You weren't asleep? No, I wasn't, said Princess Marya, shaking her head negatively, involuntarily submitting to her father. She now spoke the way he did, trying to speak more in signs, as if also moving her tongue with difficulty. Dear heart, or dear friend, Princess Marya could not make it out, but certainly by the expression of his gaze it was a tender, caressing word such as he had never spoken before. Why didn't you come? And I was wishing for his death, thought Princess Marya. He fell silent. Thank you, daughter, dear friend, for everything. Forgive me. Thank you. Forgive me. Thank you. And tears flowed from his eyes. Call Andrusha, he said suddenly, and something childishly timid and mistrustful showed in his face as he made this request. It was as if he knew himself that his request made no sense. At least it seemed so to Princess Marya. I received a letter from him, she replied. He looked at her with astonishment and timidity. Where is he? He's in the army, mon père, in Smolensk. He fell silent for a long time, closing his eyes. Then he nodded his head affirmatively, as if in response to his doubts and to confirm that he now understood and remembered everything, and opened his eyes. Yes, he said distinctly and softly. Russia's lost. They've lost her. And again he sobbed and the tears flowed from his eyes. Princess Marya could no longer help herself and also wept, looking at his face. He closed his eyes again. His sobbing stopped. He gestured toward his eyes, and Tikhon understood and wiped his eyes. He then opened his eyes and said something that no one could understand for a long time, and that Tikhon finally understood and explained. Princess Marya sought the meaning of his words in the mood in which he had spoken a moment before. First she thought he was speaking of Russia, then of Prince Andrei, then of her, of his grandson, of his death, and that kept her from guessing his words. Put on your white dress. I like it, he said. Having understood these words, Princess Marya burst into still louder sobs, and the doctor, taking her by the arm, led her from the room to the terrace, persuading her to calm down and busy herself with the preparations for departure. After Princess Marya left the prince, he began talking about his son, about the war, the sovereign, twitched his eyebrows angrily, began raising his hoarse voice, and had a second and final stroke. Princess Marya stopped on the terrace. The day had cleared. It was sunny and hot. She could not understand anything or think about anything or feel anything except her passionate love for her father, a love which it seemed to her she had not known till that moment. She ran out to the garden and, sobbing, ran down the pond along a path lined with young lindens planted by Prince Andrei. Yes, I wished for his death. Yes, I wished it would end sooner. I wanted to be at peace. But what will become of me? What do I need for peace if he won't be there? Princess Marya murmured aloud, pacing the garden with quick steps, her arms pressed to her breast, from which sobs burst convulsively. Making a circle around the garden which led her back to the house, she saw Mademoiselle Bourienne coming towards her. She had stayed on at Bogachevaro and did not want to leave, and an unknown man with her. It was the marshal of the district nobility who had come in person to the princess in order to present to her all the necessity of a speedy departure. Princess Marya listened and did not understand him. She led him to the house, offered him lunch, and sat down with him. Then, apologizing to the marshal, she went to the old prince's door. The doctor came out to her with an alarmed face and said she could not come in. Go away, Princess Marya. Go away. Go away. Princess Marya went back to the garden and sat down in the grass at the foot of the hill by the pond, where no one could see her. She did not know how long she stayed there. A woman's footsteps running down the path brought her to her senses. She stood up and saw Dunyasha, her maid, who had evidently come running to fetch her, and had suddenly stopped as if frightened at seeing her mistress. Please, princess, the prince, Dunyasha said in a faltering voice. At once, I'm coming, said the princess said hurriedly, not giving Dunyasha time to finish what she had to say, and trying not to see Dunyasha. She ran towards the house. Princess, God's will is being done. You must be prepared for anything, said the marshal, meeting her at the front door. Let me be, it's not true, she shouted at him angrily. The doctor wanted to stop her. She pushed him away and ran up to the door. Why do these people with frightened faces stop me? I don't need anybody. What are they doing here? And she opened the door and was terrified by the bright daylight in this previously semi-dark room. There were women in the room and the nanny. They all stepped back from the bed, making way for her. He lay on the bed in the same way. With a stern look of his calm face, stopped Princess Marya on the threshold. No, he hasn't died. It can't be, Princess Marya said to herself, and went up to him. And overcoming the horror that seized her, pressed her lips to his cheek. But she drew back from him at once. Instantly, the whole force of the tenderness for him which she felt in herself vanished and was replaced by a feeling of horror at what lay before her. No, he's no more. He's no more. In the place where he was there is something alien and hostile, something dreadful, terrifying, and repulsive mystery. Covering her face with her hands, Princess Marya fell into the arms of the doctor who supported her. In the presence of Tikhon and the doctor, the women washed what had been him, bound his head with a handkerchief so that the open mouth would not stiffen, and with another handkerchief bound together the legs, which were beginning to spread. Then they dressed the small shriveled body in the uniform with decorations and lay it out on the table. God knows who took care of it or when, but everything got done as if by itself. Towards nighttime, candles were burning around the coffin. On the coffin lay a pall. The floor was strewn with juniper boughs. Under the dead man's withered head, a printed prayer had been placed, and in the corner sat a beetle reading the Psalter. As horses shy, crowd, and snort over a dead horse, so people crowded around the coffin in the drawing room. Strangers and familiars, the marshal, the headman, the peasant women, all with a fixed and frightened gaze, crossed themselves and bowed and kissed the cold and stiffened hand of the old prince. That's the end of section 8. And I'm going to just stop there because I'm running a little behind today. But I think that seems like a good place to put a little pin in it. We'll come back to it tomorrow, so don't fret. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and see you tomorrow.